Hi, welcome to We3 Read. I'm Sarah. I'm going to go over the books that I read in June and July. I didn't get a chance to record in June because of technical difficulties, but I was reading, and so I'm going to go over both months now. The book I read first in June was Spinning Silver. It's a fantasy book. I love fantasy, so really wanted to give this one a try. I waited a little bit. I was reading it with a friend in Washington. We were going to try to read it around the same time, and that didn't work out because I was kind of busy and she was busy, so we weren't reading it exactly at the same time. So we're going to give that a try again, though, sometime. Anyways, this Spinning Silver is loosely based on the Rumpelstiltskin story. I say loosely, and I mean loosely. Very, very loosely based on Rumpelstiltskin. It probably wasn't until the last half of the book that the comparison even came in, and that's when the White King was introduced, and I believe he's supposed to be the Rumpelstiltskin character. But I did really enjoy this book. I really enjoyed the three protagonists in the book. So first you have Miriam, and she is the daughter of a moneylender, and he's not very good at his job, so she eventually takes over doing his job. And then there's Wanda, who's the daughter of an abusive father, and he is heavily in debt. And then there's another character, and I can't say, I'm not exactly sure how to say her name. I think it's Iranushka, and she's the daughter of a duke, and her father basically views her as a commodity. And so the story weaves their stories in together, and so you jump from the three characters throughout the story, and eventually their stories meet. Each of the three protagonists has expectations placed upon them, whether by their family or society, both actually. For Wanda and Miriam, definitely by their little village. Their family, Miriam's family seems a little more open to different things. Wanda's father definitely get married to a local man. Iranushka, her expectations definitely by her father, who wants her to get married in royalty, and that's definitely a societal expectation for the community she's in as well. And it was very interesting to read how they either exceeded the expectations or went on an entirely different path and succeeded in that way. I found the stories of the three protagonists each to be captivating in their own right. And so I did not get confused when it jumped from protagonist to protagonist, from Wanda to Miriam to Iranushka, back to Wanda, maybe back to Iranushka. It was it did do that, but it wasn't confusing at all. And the payoff was really worth it when they eventually their stories met together. I would definitely recommend reading this book. The next book I read in June was The Midnight Library. So I picked up this book because I read the synopsis and it sounded like a little bit sci-fi. So it's a contemporary fiction book with just a smidgen of sci-fi in it, enough to capture my attention even more. Because while I do like reading contemporary fiction, I really love sci-fi. And so I thought this would be right up my alley. So the synopsis, when I first read it, captured my attention with this phrase: somewhere out beyond the edge of the universe, there is a library that contains an infinite number of books. So that, with this title, led me to say, oh wow, this is going to be about books. Not so much. So I was a little disappointed in that, but luckily I continued reading on in the synopsis, which I don't always do, and then I have these expectations for the books that are not met. But luckily I continued reading the synopsis, and it said, each one the story of another reality. And so that's where the little bit of sci-fi comes in, and that's why I decided to read it. So I read this book kind of knowing that it was going to be the trope of, you have regrets, let's try it again. And that's okay, because I enjoy that. But this book didn't really bring anything new to that trope. So it's about Nora, who is not happy with her life, and trigger warning for depression and suicide. She ends up in the Midnight Library, and she's able to pick a regret and then live that life that she would have lived had she made a different choice. And of course, she learns a lesson, because don't they always in this trope? And that's it. I'm glad I read it, because I do like that trope. Like, I really do. I like the, let's try it again, new choices. I like that trope. So I did like it. It just didn't bring anything new, and it was okay. I also read Book of Night. This is a fantasy book where shadows can be altered for cosmetic purposes, but also to gain power. And there's kind of a price to doing this, though, so it's not a great thing to do. Sometimes the shadows also end up becoming alive on their own. So that's the magical world that Charlie Hall lives in. She's part of the criminal underworld, where there's shadow thieves and murder and all that stuff, and she's trying to kind of distance herself from that, change her course, I guess. So I appreciate a good magical system, and I felt that this book really brought that. I would love to read more about shadow magic, more stories from this magical world. What I didn't really care for in this book were the characters and the plot. Except for one character, and this is the character that ends up making the story. It's not who you expect would, because it's not Charlie Hall. But this character ends up not being who I expected them to be, and really changed the book for me, because the only reason I kept reading this book is because I liked the magical system of the shadows. I wanted to read more about altering shadows, the different ways you could alter them, the different reasons people would alter them, what happened when you altered them, why you would alter them, how you alter them, all of that stuff. I loved reading all about that. But the plot was not great. The characters weren't hugely interesting, except for this one character who you really didn't know much about, so he's kind of mysterious, and that made him a little more interesting. And then there's a point in the book towards the end, so this is a really slow burn, where he just becomes the focal point and integral to the whole wrap up. And that really, he makes it worth it. Like, what happens to him and his story and what we find out about him really makes reading the whole story worth it. And there wasn't a point when I didn't want to read the book, where I thought I wasn't going to finish it, because like I said, the magical system I really enjoyed. But if you're not that into magical systems, the characters in the plot, I don't feel were enough to keep you reading. So if you're not that into magical systems and you think you're going to read this, and you were wanting to read this book anyway, you do have to get through some almost tedious character plot storyline stuff until you get to the end, which is really good. Honestly, it was really worth reading the rest of the book for. I loved the ending. So I don't know, read it if you like magical systems, for sure. Read it if you appreciate a slow burn book, if you can get through the first part to get to the payoff at the end, what I felt was a really good payoff. There is a book I didn't finish in June, and that's really hard for me to do. I am learning to be better at it. Why waste time reading a book you're not enjoying, right? There's so many books out there that I would enjoy. So I'm getting better at it. And this month I didn't finish the Book of Fate. Kind of my fault in the beginning. So I didn't read the synopsis, which I tend to do quite frequently. If I'm picking up a free book, like I'm at a little free library, I don't sit and read all the synopsises of all the books I'm interested in. I put my books in that I'm getting rid of, and I pick up books that look interesting based on the cover and the title. And so that's what I did with this. And I did think it was going to be interesting. I thought it could go two ways, though. So because of the title, The Book of Fate, I thought maybe it could be a supernatural or fantasy book, more along the lines of supernatural. My recollection is that The Book of Fate is included in some supernatural stories. It was not that at all. So after I put that aside and read the first chapter, I thought maybe based on the first chapter and this the cover art, I thought maybe we'd go along the Da Vinci Code National Treasure lines, which you know, I love that too. It wasn't really that either. I thought it could be. I thought it might be going there. That's why I read about half the book before I finally stopped, but it didn't quite get there. So it's about a Washington presidential aide. Bad things happen. There's is a little bit of maybe conspiracy theories going on, stuff with the government. It just didn't quite get there for me. I just realized I needed to stop when I was not looking forward to picking it up and reading it again. And it wasn't that it was poorly written, because it wasn't. It was that it wasn't interesting to me. I didn't find the characters interesting. I didn't find the plot interesting. There just wasn't anything that captivated me, that made me want to reach for the book and read more. The first book I read in July was The Little Bookshop on the Seine. So after reading The Midnight Library, which was not about books at all, even though I really thought it was going to be, I was really craving a book that was about books. This I picked up at a little free library, and it had just been sitting on my shelf waiting to be read until I was in the mood for it. And because I wanted a book about books, I was hoping this was a book about books, and it was. Sarah owns a bookshop in a little small town in Connecticut in the US. I do love that her name is my name too. Pretty common name, so it happens a lot. Anyway, so she swaps bookstores with a friend in Paris. So now she's running a bookstore in Paris, and that, you know, it's a little more challenging than running the one in her little small town. And she has employees that she has to work with that she didn't have any employees, I think, in her small bookstore. And so she has to get used to that aspect and just being in an unfamiliar place. And so we learn about Sarah as she goes on this journey in Paris. And it was about books, in the sense that Sarah really, really loves her books, and how she feels about books is how I'm sure a lot of us on BookTube feel about books. So this did fit the craving for reading about books. It also was a light summer read, just like I thought it was going to be. But there was not as much romance as I thought, so that was a little interesting. I think it's the first in a series. So I looked it up on Goodreads and it was unclear to me. So it looked like it was the first in the series, but also a second in a series. So I'm wondering if it kind of branches off and we might hear more about what happens with Sarah later. So I don't know. I might pick up the other ones just to see where she continues on. The next book I read in July was The Graveyard Book. Now I have a bit of history with this book. It came out in about 2008, I think. I probably picked it up a year or two later. And at that time, I had a toddler, my first. And after reading the first chapter, where everyone in a family gets murdered except for a little toddler who toddles off into a graveyard, I was done. Couldn't do it. Put down the book and didn't pick it up until now. I don't know, something was happening in my life right then with a new little toddler that I couldn't read a book about a toddler whose whole family was murdered. I didn't know what was going to happen in the rest of the book. I didn't really know anything about it, but I was done. But I kept hearing what a great book it is. It's dark fantasy, which I love, and I wanted to give it another try, but knew I had to be in the right frame of mind where I wasn't thinking of my own little toddler. So now my children are older, and I felt like, all right, I'll give it another try. And I'm glad I did. I really enjoyed this book. So, like I said, the first chapter, really dark. Like, really dark. Not sure how this is a kid's book. But the rest of it was really great. So he toddles off into a graveyard, and there the ghostly inhabitants adopt him. And what I really, really took away from this story and really liked is that they were just this great community. They all had a part to play in Nobody's life. That's his name, Nobody. They all contributed to his well-being and his education, and to give him what he needed in this graveyard. Now, the reason he has to stay in this graveyard is because he's still being hunted down by Jack, the man who murdered his family. So the graveyard accepts him, and that he's allowed to stay there to keep him safe because Jack can't sense him when he's in the graveyard. I loved the supernatural aspects about this book, and what kept it even more entertaining is that not everything is explained to the fullest extent. So, for example, there's this character, Silas, who's nobody's guardian. And Silas is not a ghost, but he's not a fully alive human either. Now, my brain automatically goes, okay, that means you're undead, maybe a vampire. You know, except he's not harming nobody in any way. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what Silas is, what kind of supernatural being he is, but that made it even more interesting. I kept reading to get more clues about what kind of creature he could be. So that was very entertaining. Jack, the villain, the character who murdered the whole family and is after nobody now, or at least I kept reading to find out his motivation. He seemed to have a purpose. He wasn't just a killer. Like, there was a reason. He had a motivation, and then you find out, and I love this wordplay, that he's a member of a society. Oh, spoilers. But you know, this book is old. But the Jack of all trades, they're all named a form of Jack, and he's Jack Frost. And so I loved that wordplay. But you find out his motivation, which that was a way to keep me hooked. Loved that. So yeah, I ended up really enjoying this book. Definitely wasn't ready to read it when I first picked it up, but I'm glad I did now. The rest of it, after you get past that first chapter, there's lots of good lessons about taking advice from other people who have lived their lives, you know, and your elders, I guess, and just you're reading the highlights of his life, of nobody's life, as he grows. And I found it very entertaining. Loved the fantasy and supernatural aspects. That's one of my favorite genres, and I would recommend this to anybody with the trigger warning of the whole family gets murdered. The last book I finished in July was also my favorite book for the 2 months, and that's The Paradox Hotel. Loved this book. So January is the head of security at the Paradox Hotel. And this is a hotel that is close to a time port, and rich people who want to go on vacation in the past stay here to await their departure. January is unstuck. This is because her previous job, she traveled to the past to stop people who wanted to mess with the timeline. So because she spent so much time in the past or in time traveling, she's in stage 2 of this disease, which means she skips to the past without any notice. So obviously that's affecting her mental state and leaves her disoriented as to what is reality and what is not. VIP guests arrive. They're trillionaires who are there to bid on the tech. The US government owns the tech for time travel, but they are going to privatize it. And when they arrive, things start going a little bit awry. Security cameras malfunction. There's dinosaurs in the hotel, which sounds far-fetched, but isn't, because time travel. January is also struggling with her past amongst all of this, and while she's trying to figure out what's going on, why this is all happening. I love wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff, time travel anyway, so this was right up my alley. But like people like my mom who really don't like time travel, it would be very confusing. She would not want to read this book at all. Mom, don't read this book. But yeah, because it was so complex, I thought it was a lot of fun. People said it was confusing. I didn't find that either. Because January figures it out, you can figure it out. And she's a slightly unreliable narrator, but not so much that it throws you off. And I could see where people would get confused or think that it's complicated to read her slipping in and out of the past and what's reality and what isn't, what is because of her and what isn't. But I felt that the author made it very clear. She would basically say, this is not a skip. This is happening right now, or now I'm in a skip. And you can tell because she couldn't interact with things when she was in a skip as well. They're almost like ghosts of the past. So I felt it like it was very clear, and that the author did a really good job of making a complex plot make a lot of sense. I loved the premise. I felt like it was a really good and new take on time travel. I love that it gave me something new with the unstuck disease and with the way the timeline was reacting to what was happening. I felt like that was all just very interesting, which I know sounds mundane and not a great way to explain it, but I also don't want to give spoilers away. So I felt like it was a very good take on time travel, and I really, really enjoyed this. I would recommend this book to anyone who enjoys time travel. So we're at the end of July, and I did start reading another book. Obviously I haven't finished yet, so this will be in my August reviews, but I started The Third Gate. I am enjoying this book so far. I'm not very far into it, but here's why. So this opening was very sad, like so sad that I didn't know if I wanted to keep reading, because again, this is another book where I didn't read the synopsis, and because of the sad opening, I thought, oh, is this just going to be, am I going to be disappointed like the last book? Is it just going to be about him being really sad and how he overcomes that? I don't know that that's something I want to read right now, but I'm going to continue on, and I'm glad I did, because by page 17, we meet an enigmologist, I don't think I'm saying that right, and we learn about transmortality studies. So now I'm all in, right? And I'm not even that far. And it looks like they're going to go to an archaeological site, and there's going to be some supernatural stuff, and so I'm pretty excited about this book, and I can't wait to review it for you in August. Thanks for watching my reviews on what I've read so far this summer. I'd love to hear what you thought about these books as well, if you've read them, and if you haven't, if you're looking forward to reading any of them now, and maybe even telling me about the one I didn't finish, and did you like it, and if so, why? This channel, We Three Read, has a little bit of something for everyone, so check out our teen reviewer and our child reviewer as well. Bye!